Hey, sports fans. Welcome to Asians in Hockey. You may not realize it, but there's a rich history of Asians and AAPI folks who have contributed to the legacy of the greatest game on ice. From classic legends like Julie Chu and Robin Bawa to current greats like Leah Lum and Nick Suzuki, and even rising stars like Akane Shiga and Jason Robertson. We'll cover their stories, celebrate their accomplishments, and learn about their impact on the sport of hockey. I'm Nate Nakau, former beer league player, occasional youth hockey coach, and longtime hockey fan, and I'll be your host as we take a look at the rise of Asians in hockey. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at Asians in Hockey and on Blue Sky at asiansinhockey.bsky.social. See you soon. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Asians in Hockey. I'm so glad you're listening in. By way of introduction, my name is Nate Nakau, and I'm just someone who absolutely loves the game of hockey. I played ice hockey for about 6 years, though I stopped abruptly shortly before the pandemic thanks to a multiple cruciate ligament tear during a game. I still occasionally coach hockey, and I teach learn to skate and learn to play programs from time to time. But my, I guess, main cred when it comes to hockey is just being a fan. So why did I start this podcast? Well, I'm one of those kinds of people who truly believes that everyone can and should feel empowered to play the sport that they love, and really hockey, come on. Sadly, minorities have historically had a difficult time breaking into these spaces, particularly at very high levels. Whether you're a racial minority, a woman, an LGBTQ plus person, or some combination of all or any of those, you've probably grown up feeling excluded from your own sport. Thankfully, though, that landscape is changing, and it's in large part due to the efforts of those who struggled so hard to be noticed and gain ice time. Without someone like Larry Kwong, we would not have a Paul Kariya. But why Asians in hockey? Well, Asians and AAPI folks have contributed so much to the game of hockey, but have unfortunately gone unrecognized. So my hope is that through this podcast, we'll shine a light on their amazing history and talk about what they've done in and because of the sport of hockey. Oh, and I myself am Asian. I'm biracially Japanese and Filipino American. So this isn't going to be your typical sports podcast. I'll do my best to cover the latest news and maybe do a little analysis here and there when I can, but my goal is to show you how what takes place off the ice is often just as important as, if not sometimes even more important than, what takes place on the ice. Okay, before we drop the puck on this podcast, I have a few favors to ask. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and many others. Also, please share this show with your friends. Hopefully there's something you find enjoyable or worthwhile here, and you want others to get involved as well. It would also be great if you could give us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. A quick rating and review will go a long way towards getting us into more ears. Oh, and come find me on social media. I'm mostly active on Instagram, at Asians in Hockey, but I'll also try to be more active on Blue Sky as well, where you can find me at asiansinhockey.bsky.social. Lastly, I'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to reach out to me on social media or on email. My address is asiansinhockeypod@gmail.com. So to give you a preview of what this week's episode is going to be like, in the first period, we will take a look around the Asian hockey world and introduce ourselves to the various currently active players of Asian descent in the major North American leagues, as well as take a look at the IIHF Women's World Championships, which is going on right now. And then in the second period, we're going to take a look at a legendary player of Asian descent, the very first Asian player in the NHL, Larry Kwong. We'll take a quick overview of his life and career, and then we're going to talk with Chad Soon, who co-wrote a book about the life and career of Larry Kwong called The Longest Shot. And I highly recommend the book. And I'm really excited for you to hear the conversation that I had with Chad. So stay tuned for that in the third period. All right, so for the first period, I want to actually introduce you to the currently active players of Asian descent that I could find who are connected to one of the major North American leagues. Now, I would love to be able to keep tabs on all of the various leagues and find as many Asian players as possible. Unfortunately, I'm doing this by myself, so I'm kind of just relying on my own Google abilities to be able to track down players of Asian descent. So I'm just going to be sticking with the major North American leagues. Now, if I've missed anyone, please let me know. You can reach out to me, like I said earlier, at asiansinhockeypod@gmail.com. Please shoot me an email if I've missed anyone, and I will look them up and I'll make mention of them here on the podcast. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first player I want to mention is Akane Shiga. Akane Shiga is listed as a forward, though it does kind of look like she leans towards the right wing. She plays for Luleå HF in the SDHL, which is the Swedish Women's Hockey League, and she is a Japanese hockey player. Now, I mention her here because even though she plays for a team in the Swedish league, I mention her here because she last year had played for PWHL Ottawa, and the PWHL is the elite women's hockey league, professional women's hockey league here in North America. So if you haven't checked out a PWHL game yet, please check it out. It's a really exciting league to follow. Akane Shiga had played for PWHL Ottawa, like I mentioned, and that team would eventually become the Ottawa Charge. She's also playing for the Japanese national team, and they are currently in the IIHF Women's World Championship. Japan has been qualifying for the top division over the last few years, so that actually is some pretty exciting news. So I'll be keeping tabs on Japan throughout the tournament, and I'll be posting some stuff on our Instagram account. So be sure to give us a follow for updates on how Japan is doing in the Women's World Championships. All right, so moving on, we've got Matt Dumba, who plays defense for the Dallas Stars of the NHL, and Matt is Filipino Canadian. Sorry. Now, Dallas has clinched a playoff spot, so we'll be keeping track of Matt until they get eliminated. Next up, we've got Devin Shore, who plays center for the Minnesota Wild of the NHL, and Devin is Filipino-Canadian as well. Minnesota hasn't clinched yet as of the time that I'm recording this, but they have 95 points and are currently in the first wildcard spot. Calgary is 5 points behind them, so they should be fine. Next up, we've got Kyler Yamamoto, who's a right winger for the Utah Hockey Club of the NHL. Kyler is Japanese and native Hawaiian. Now, Utah has been eliminated, so unfortunately, we'll have to say farewell to Kyler for this season. Goodbye, Kyler. We'll see you next season. Next up, we've got Jonas Siegenthaler, who plays defense for the New Jersey Devils of the NHL. Jonas is Swiss Thai. Now, unfortunately, we don't really have any news on Jonas because he's been out since February with a lower body injury, I believe. Jersey has made the playoffs, though. So if he comes back during the playoffs, we'll certainly talk about it here. Next up, we have Kiefer Sherwood, who plays right wing for the Vancouver Canucks. Kiefer is Japanese-American. Now, Vancouver has been eliminated, so let's go ahead and bid Kiefer goodbye until next season. Goodbye, Kiefer. Next up, we've got Nick Suzuki, who is a center for the Montreal Canadiens of the NHL. Nick is Japanese-Canadian, and I'd like to officially announce on our first episode of the podcast that Nick Suzuki is the unofficial captain of the Asians in Hockey podcast. Now, as of the time that I'm recording this, Montreal hasn't yet clinched a playoff spot, but they are currently in the second wild card position. If Washington beats Columbus tonight, the Habs will be locked in. If Columbus wins, Montreal can clinch tomorrow night against Chicago. So either way, we'll most likely continue talking about our captain for a little while longer. Next up, we've got Jason Robertson, who plays left wing for the Dallas Stars of the NHL. Jason is Filipino-American. Again, Dallas has clinched, so we'll keep track of Jason for a bit longer, hopefully. And next up, we've got Jason's brother, Nicholas Robertson, who plays left wing for the Toronto Maple Leafs of the NHL. Nicholas is also, of course, Filipino-American, and Toronto has unfortunately clinched a playoff spot. But on a positive note, that does mean we get to keep following Nicholas for a little while longer. Next up, we've got Kevin Ball, who plays defense for the Calgary Flames of the NHL, and Kevin is Punjabi-Canadian. Calgary hasn't clinched yet, but like I said earlier, they are only 4 points behind St. Louis for the second wildcard spot in the West. St. Louis holds the tiebreaker, though, so it does seem kind of unlikely that we'll be talking about Kevin past this week, so I suppose we should probably bid Kevin farewell. So see you next season, Kevin. Next up, we've got Jordan Spence, who plays defense for the Los Angeles Kings of the NHL. Jordan is Japanese-Canadian, and as you can tell by his name, he is Hapa. Los Angeles has already clinched a playoff spot, so as with the others who are in the playoffs, we do get to keep an eye on Jordan for a bit longer, at least. Jacob Bryson is up next, and Jacob plays defense for the Buffalo Sabres of the NHL, and Jacob is Korean-Canadian. Now, he hasn't played for a while due to an injury, but he is slated to be back for tonight's game against Tampa Bay. Now, unfortunately for both him and for us, Buffalo has been eliminated, so we won't be following him anymore after this week. So goodbye, Jacob. We'll see you next season. Next up, we have Jujhar Khaira, who plays left wing and center for the Abbotsford Canucks of the AHL. He was drafted by the Edmonton Oilers and is Punjabi-Canadian. So because he plays in the AHL, it does make it a little bit harder for me to keep track of his stats, but I'll do what I can over the rest of the AHL season. In Abbotsford, they have clinched a playoff spot in the AHL. So we'll do what we can. Next up, we have Akito Hirose, who plays defense for the Abbotsford Canucks of the AHL. He was signed by the Vancouver Canucks and is Japanese-Canadian. Like with Jujhar, I'll do what I can to keep up with the AHL info since Abbotsford is making it into the playoffs, like I said. Okay. Next up, we have Arshdeep Bains, who plays left wing for the Abbotsford Canucks of the AHL. And he was signed by the Vancouver Canucks as well. Arshdeep is Punjabi-Canadian. And again, we'll do what we can to keep track of Arshdeep as the Abbotsford Canucks make it through the playoffs. Hopefully. We'll see. And next we have Ryan Suzuki, who plays left wing for the Chicago Wolves of the AHL. Ryan was drafted by the Carolina Hurricanes, and like his brother Nick, our podcast captain, Ryan is also Japanese-Canadian. Since Chicago is in the playoffs of the AHL, we'll see if we can keep an eye on him as well. Next up, we have Zane Parekh, a defender for the Calgary Flames of the NHL. And Zane is Indian-Korean-Canadian. Now, Zane's season with the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL ended last weekend. And he was recently called up to the NHL, but he has yet to hit the ice with the Flames. And like I said before, since Calgary is just outside a playoff spot, maybe, but it is unlikely that they're going to make it to the playoffs with so few games left in the season. So let's bid Zane farewell preemptively until next season. Hopefully we'll see you a little bit before next season, but really unlikely. See you next season, Zane. And finally, we have Kevin He, who plays left wing for the Niagara Ice Dogs of the OHL. And Kevin was drafted by the Winnipeg Jets and is Chinese Canadian. An interesting fact, he was born in China, which makes him the first NHL player and first NHL prospect born in China. Now, the Jets have clinched the Western Conference, so maybe Kevin will get a call up. I don't actually know. I haven't really been following him, so who knows what's gonna end up happening. But he did have a pretty incredible season with the Ice Dogs, where he got a total of 75 points over the course of the season. So good job, Kevin, and hopefully we'll see you around. If not, we'll catch up with you next season. So for today's second period, we're going to do a player profile. And for this first episode, I thought what better way to kick things off than with a player profile on the very first player of Asian descent in the NHL. Now, unfortunately, this isn't a heartwarming story in any way. It's not one of those color barrier breaking stories that you look at and you're just inspired. Larry was an inspirational person, and his story can be inspirational to many, but it doesn't have the happy ending that, say, Willie O'Ree or Jackie Robinson's stories have. So what I'll do is kind of just give an overview of Larry Kwong's life and hockey career, just briefly. In fact, this second period is going to be a short second period because in the third period, I have a conversation with Chad Soon, who co-authored a book about Larry Kwong's life. And I think Larry Kwong's story is best told through that lens. And I also want to encourage you to go support Chad and the work that he's doing and the work that others around Chad and organizations that Chad is supporting and a part of, the work that they are all doing. I also want to encourage you to, if you can, purchase Chad's book. It's a children's book, but I think it's incredibly relevant and definitely a worthwhile read for anyone of any age. The book is titled The Longest Shot, and it is about the life and career of Larry Kwong. So just to give like an overview of Larry Kwong's life, Larry was born in 1923 in Vernon, British Columbia. So what's wild is that Larry was born the same year as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923, the same year that the Chinese Exclusion Act went into effect in Canada. What's wild about this is that as an American, I didn't even realize that Canada also had a Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, here in the US, if you're a Canadian listener, you probably don't know that the American Chinese Exclusion Act went into effect in 1882 and wasn't repealed until 1943. The Chinese Exclusion Act went into effect in 1923 and was not repealed until 1947. So it's almost like Canada was copying the worst parts of the US, unfortunately. So over the course of Larry's young life, and actually throughout his life and career, he faced a ton of racial discrimination. Since Chinese immigrants were prohibited from entering Canada, there was, and of course the US as well, there was just a lot of racism, racial discrimination, and at least here in the US, violence against Chinese and people of Chinese descent. Now, as a kid, Kwong had been playing ice hockey in Vernon, like on frozen ponds. And I love the way that Chad kind of um describes this in his book of essentially creating ponds for him and his brothers to play on. Um, a totally different life back then, of course, but still that same sort of sense of we love this game and we'll do anything and everything we can to play it. Now, unlike a lot of kids at the time, Kwong didn't get into organized hockey until much later in life. He didn't start playing organized hockey until he was 16 years old. However, he was so good that he led his team, the Vernon Hydrophones, um, to the Midget Hockey Championship of BC in 1939, and then on to the provincial juvenile title in 1941. When he was 18 years old, Kwong skyrocketed and went on to play senior hockey after trying out for the semi professional Trail Smoke Eaters, who had won the 1931 World Ice Hockey Championships. In trail, players who made the roster got good paying jobs at a local smelter, but Kwong wasn't able to get a job at the smelter because of his Chinese heritage. So instead, he went to work as a bellhop at a nearby hotel. A few years later, in 1942, the Chicago Blackhawks invited Kwong to their training camp, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he wasn't able to cross the border into the U.S. His paperwork wasn't able to be processed in order to leave the country. In 1944, Kwong was drafted into the Canadian Army, but instead of being deployed, he was actually selected to join the Central Alberta Garrison Hockey League and play for a team called the Red Deer Wheelers. And then after World War II, Kwong went back to Trail to play for the Smoke Eaters and won the provincial senior hockey championship in 1946. In that series against the new Westminster Royals, Kwong led the Smoke Eaters in scoring and scored the cup-winning goal in that series. Later that year, Lester Patrick, who was the coach of the New York Rangers at the time, scouted Kwong and was quite impressed for him. So he was signed to the New York Rovers, which is the farm team for the New York Rangers. Kwong ended up scoring a goal in his debut game with the Rovers in Boston on October 27th, 1946. And just a couple weeks later, Shavy Lee, who was kind of the unofficial mayor of New York Chinatown, presented Kwong with the key to Chinatown in New York. Kwong went on to lead the New York Rovers in scoring in the 1947-48 season with 86 points in 65 games. So Kwong was no slouch. In 1948, on March 13th, Kwong broke the NHL color barrier. In a game against the storied Montreal Canadiens in the legendary hockey venue, the Montreal Forum, Kwong made his NHL debut with the New York Rangers. Unfortunately, Kwong did not get to play at all during the first period or during the second period or during almost the entirety of the third period. It wasn't until the last shift of the game that Kwong was put out onto the ice to play just about 60 seconds of NHL ice time. Now, Kwong did end up having an illustrious career outside the NHL. He went to play in the Quebec senior leagues and really made a name for himself against some of the NHL's greatest players, like Jean Beliveau. He was coached by Toe Blake, who was one of the legendary Montreal Canadiens coaches. And even his coaches went on to say that he was one of the best players to have ever played the game. But unfortunately, he never got his chance. So now that you have an overview of Larry Kwong's life and NHL career, I want to actually go ahead and transition into the third period, where we'll get a little bit more detail about Larry Kwong's life and some information about a lot of the work that is being done in hockey in his name. Stay tuned. All right, for this period of the podcast, I actually have a guest with me today. I'm very excited to introduce to you all Chad Soon, who is involved in hockey in a number of different ways. I'll kind of let him sort of tell his story when it comes to hockey. But just by way of introduction, he was the co-author of the book The Longest Shot about Larry Kwong. And I think from here, we'll just dive right in. Chad, welcome to the show. So glad you're here.
Hi, Nate. Jazzed to be here. I've been waiting for this podcast my whole life. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming. So I guess to kind of start things off, I'm kind of curious about your own involvement in the sport of hockey. As we're all pretty well aware, it's pretty uncommon. I won't quite say rare anymore, but it is pretty uncommon for people of Asian descent to get into the sport of hockey. So how did that happen for you? And what was your experience like growing up in the sport, if you grew up in the sport or if you came to it at a later age?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up on Vancouver Island, so one of the disadvantages there was that we didn't have natural ice outside. So I picked up the game when I was I became a hockey fan. I probably was about 8 years old, and even then I was aware of the expense of it. So like for a couple of years, I didn't ask to play. I played soccer instead, just, to save my parents the expense. And then finally in fifth grade, by that point I was, just obsessed with the game and reading everything I could about hockey. And so I joined house league hockey and played, just stayed in house league for several years. I found it. I played a lot of ball hockey, growing up in a temperate climate, but ice hockey, enjoyed it. But it was full contact even in house league back then. And so as a little guy, and who started late, I would get knocked around pretty good. So kind of a house league fourth line player. Nobody ever said, "Hey, it's the next Larry Kwong." But I, just love the game, and so I sort of went more into the fandom of it, into reading everything I could get. And my grandpa had been he grew up in Vancouver's Chinatown, and he was a fan. He was encyclopedic about the game, and he would tell me stories about going to games in the back in the day, and then he told me about his hero, about Larry Kwong, and it kind of caught me by surprise, the fact that there had been another Chinese player at a high level back then, because we're talking about the 40s. Larry was born in 1923. My grandpa was born in 27. So the 30s and 40s. And as much as I'd read, I thought I saw myself as a little mini expert about hockey, and I'd never come across this name. And so I do recall thinking that, gee, I mean, maybe my grandpa's. I mean, how good could this player have been if there just isn't anything about him in any of my books or magazines? But
Right.
yeah, so I played, just continued to play mostly street hockey and
Mhm.
just, but being unable to find anything more about Larry Kwong, I kind of just, forgot about him, forgot about that
Mm.
story, and just flipped on Hockey Night in Canada, and that was about it.
Wow. So we'll come back to Larry Kwong in a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. But I'm curious about kind of the progression too, because I noticed on your Instagram profile,
Yeah,
you've listed a few different organizations, and I know this is kind of tangentially related to Larry Kwong. So he's
sure.
kind of the ghost in our conversation, and then he'll take center stage in a few minutes. But
Yeah.
there's an organization that you're a part of. Do you think you could speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, we started it, after meeting Larry Kwong. Okay, so just there'd been an ongoing campaign to get Larry more recognition for years and years and years, going back to about 2007. And a few years ago, a guy named Moisin Hasham, who runs Hockey for Youth, and he
Hmm.
a foundation he started in 2015, which provides free ice time coaching, equipment to kids who wouldn't be able to access the game. Many of these kids are immigrants. Many of them are, well, just low income families.
Hmm.
The whole gamut. And he caught onto the story, and just, again, it just caught him by surprise. So here's another guy who's followed hockey his whole life and hadn't heard the story, and so he saw how it could, how his kids, his players might be able to relate to this story, um, in terms of representation and just the
Hmm.
struggle that Larry went through. And
Yeah.
so yeah, he came on board, and he has put a program in Larry's hometown of Vernon, BC, where I now live. And so
Hmm.
we run it out of my elementary school, and we have 20 kids on the ice. We've done that for a couple of years. So we coordinate that and coach, and it's coached by mostly teachers and my kids, my wife, and yeah, it's been a great experience. And so it's one of that program it's the Larry Kwong Memorial Hockey for Youth program.
Mm.
It's kind of like the first thing that was named after Larry. After all these years, Larry'd be 102. He'd be this year, and
Mm.
that's one of the things in terms of the campaign to get him more recognition is like, let's get his name on some things, like maybe an arena, but to have that program and what it stands for. And I know his family's 100% in support. They came for the opening,
Mm.
and they just love it. And I, Larry was a good friend, and I know that he would just be really tickled to really pleased. That was his whole thing, is uh, just giving back to the youth, giving them opportunities. He was a coach himself. He
Mhm.
would raise money with his Chinese New Year dinners for scholarships for kids, and so it's the perfect legacy, I think. So
That's
yeah,
amazing. Okay, so we've talked about and so I'm assuming you get on the ice and you coach
mm.
as well and
Yeah, oh
work
yeah,
with the kids.
yeah,
Cool,
you
cool.
bet, yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I do want to make the transition now. We've mentioned Larry a few times, and he's sort of uh, an icon without being an icon.
Right.
Like we're especially. I think in more recent years, that we probably see his name popping up a little bit more. But I'll be honest, like up until maybe it was just like 2 or 3 years ago, I wasn't even aware
Right,
of
right,
Larry Kwong.
yeah.
So what drew you to this story? I mean, you had mentioned that even yourself, you kind of just heard the name, but then you thought, how good could he really have been? If we don't really know too much about him, and then flipped on Hockey Night in Canada and called it a day.
Yeah.
So what turned you on to his story? What got you into learning more about him?
Yeah. Well, even going back to how my grandpa learned about him, it was through word of
Right,
mouth,
right.
because he's looking at newspapers. Some of Larry's family lived in Vancouver, so he actually got to know them, and so we'd
Oh,
hear
okay.
about Larry's progress through them. And, it's a tight knit community. So, uh, for me, and then that story just got lost. Like I think that generation of Chinese Canadian Americans, they didn't talk about their struggles. They didn't talk about, what they went through with the Chinese Exclusion Act, growing up with that, being considered aliens, not citizens, not people. Just all the barriers that were there. They just put their head down and tried to show their uh, didn't complain and just made the best of it and tried and hoped that the next generation, their kids would have more opportunities, so the doors would open. So that was, I think, one of the things that happened was that the story got lost because it wasn't told. Most of our stories weren't told, right? Like from the community, they just weren't. They were. They didn't want to be seen as complaining about the treatment that they got, and they just just anyway. So years later, I hear from my grandpa about it, and can't find anything. And so I like I say, I forgot about it for a long time. And it wasn't until I became a teacher, and I met another player named Herb Carnegie. So here's a black hockey player. He should have been the first black hockey player in the NHL. He had the talent, the ability. Everyone recognized it. Even the owner of the Leafs, Toronto Maple Leafs, said he would take him for the Leafs if he could turn him white. And so he's just a few years older than Larry. And so I got to know him in Toronto. And he played against Larry in the same league, in the Quebec League. And so here were two guys, visibly different, visible minorities in the game, who were two of the best players in that league. And so they could kind of relate to each other, not being able to take that next step and being held back, the color barrier, even though it wasn't written in the rules, there certainly was, those 6 franchises back then were not willing to integrate. But, so that's where it sort of came back for me, is like, oh, okay, so Larry Kwong, you played against Larry Kwong. And I remember the first time I mentioned it, Herb's, just kind of lit up. And his first memory of Larry was a play where Herb had the puck behind the net. Larry comes around the net, steals the puck, knocks it off the net, the base of the net, to himself, and just is gone. And so he was laughing just, kind of ruefully about how Larry had just picked his pocket and just made him look like a fool. And here's Herb, like he's one of the best players in the league himself. And so he had a lot of respect. They both did. They talked after that on the phone, and had a good laugh about, also there was a lot of pain there, because this was their dream since they were little, to be called, by Foster Hewitt on the radio, to live that life. And then a couple stories appeared in the news about one writer named Tom Hawthorne put a piece out in the Toronto Globe and Mail, and about how, here's this trailblazer, Larry Kwong, who broke into the NHL in 1948, 10 years before Willie O'Ree, and yet nobody knows his name. And so I think that came out in 2001. And so gradually, I guess I started to get more interested in not only Larry's story, but just my grandpa's story, my grandma's story, the whole story of what it was like to grow up in that era. And so my family history. And, finally, I think in 2007 was when I got up the nerve to call Larry on the phone and say, hey, you don't know me, but you're my grandpa's hero. I think, I look up to you, and I just wanted you to know that, you meant a lot, for my grandpa to see you climbing up the ladder of success at a time when, that just didn't seem possible, was, really inspiring for so many people on both sides of the border. And so Larry was, sadly, I don't think he was used to that kind of, people weren't, those kinds of interactions, right? Like people weren't stopping him on the street to say, hey, you're a hero. And so he kind of was, aw shucks. And we from that point, we kind of struck up a friendship. I ended up moving to his hometown the year later, and with my wife, and back to BC. And we passed through Calgary and stopped and met him for the first time in the summer of 2008. And it was I remember his daughter was really concerned that this stranger from Toronto was coming to check out his stuff. But anyway, you just couldn't hope for a nicer hero, right? Like he was so humble and just generous, and showed me all of his scrapbooks, and so over years and years we just got to know his story more and more, and looked into it, and then I would go into the old newspaper articles and kind of cross-reference stuff, and ask him about things that I'd found. And that's when it started. It was like, okay, so the 60th anniversary of his breaking the color barrier in the NHL was coming up was in 2008. And the NHL had done nothing for his 50th. And so it was, from that point on, it was kind of a race to have that breakthrough, to get some attention for this guy who was at that point in his mid 80s, right? And had been forgotten. And really the story had been erased. That's the other part of it. It's not just, I don't mean to blame the people who, the Chinese community for not, trumpeting this. It was also a league that wasn't comfortable with the story of how he was treated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not one of those, and to be fair, like none of the color barrier breaking stories are positive. They don't cast leagues and the powers that be in a good light in any of those stories.
No.
But this one, I think, just kind of looking at it, it does make it kind of easier to sweep under the rug. It's easier to say, that never existed because of the nature of the story. The fact that he barely got even a minute of ice time in his one appearance.
Right.
Just makes it easier to kind of dismiss the whole narrative, right?
And I can argue, and so that was part of, I guess, the research is to make the case for the fact that he was denied. Well, only getting a minute. Obviously, you could say, well, yeah, what can you show in a minute, right? You can't prove your ability, but the fact that he had researching, getting, interviewing people who played against him, and to make the case that he had the ability. And so that 1 minute was okay. On the one hand, it was a huge breakthrough. And that's the other thing that it's hard for I think many people to understand. Like even a minute, given the context of what Chinese Canadians, Americans were facing, was a moon landing. Like it was getting to the highest level for the first time in ever. And just to prove that it could be done, right? To get there, to climb that ladder. And so I think we do need to celebrate the 1 minute, but at the same time, when you have people like Jean Beliveau, some of the greats of the game, Dickie Moore, saying, Larry could do it all. He could score, he could shoot, he could pass, he could skate. Like, what more do they want? And Jean Beliveau, these Hall of Famers, saying that he was, just that level above. He had, a special ability. He, his coach, Toe Blake, who's in the Hall of Fame, one of the greatest, considered one of the greatest coaches, said he wouldn't trade him for anything. And you have, he's leading his team. And so he plays for the New York Rovers, the farm team of the Rangers, for 2 years. Okay. He is the leading scorer, the MVP in the second year. The whole season, he's leading the team in scoring. His coach can't understand why he's not being called up. He said, when he finally did get called up, his coach on the farm team said, you should have been up there a long time ago. There were rumors that Larry was going to be called up before Jackie Robinson in 1946. In the New York papers, but they just held him back. 20 of his teammates on the Rovers alone got better chances in the NHL. 20. And this is back in a day when they were running 3 lines.
Mm.
on the team. So they purposely held him back.
Mm.
And then the fact that they give him a minute, like what a cruel stunt that was.
Yeah.
Imagine the pain. Like Larry never dwelled on, like you couldn't forget it, but imagine like knowing that you are good enough to reach the highest level and to have that just ripped away from you without explanation,
Mm.
and to have to live with that, knowing you had the ability, but they just wouldn't let you because of the color of your skin or whatever it is. Like imagine like that. That is something, I think, a childhood dream that's being crushed. That you just, how do you get over that? And yet
Mm.
Larry, he always, the amazing thing about him was he always was positive. He was always smiling. He was always trying to make the other person feel like the star, and give his time and attention. And so, but so what happened there? Well, Larry was filling Madison Square Garden.
Mm.
Like when he came in, they were drawing 2,500 fans for their minor league games. Like they would play before the Rangers. They played in the afternoon. When Larry comes, they knew they like when they first invited Larry to try out. Their marketing person said, "Bring him even if he can't play hockey. Bring this guy, like sign this guy because he's going to sell
Mm.
tickets." They knew, of course, they knew.
Mm.
Something
Yeah.
different in New York, the city
Yeah.
that never sleeps. You need to
Right.
try and
And
attract
not to
it.
mention this, the size of New York Chinatown.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
So, like, very quickly, Larry shows his ability there, and he's given they have this Larry Kwong Day, November 17th, 1946. They invite Larry, the unofficial mayor of Chinatown, Shavy Lee, and a couple of the China dolls come, and they present Larry the key to New York's Chinatown. Like, it shows he was filling the stadium, like over 15,000 people for, like, again, a minor league hockey game in New
mm.
York. And so they were making gobs of money from this guy, and they were paying him $100 a week, right?
Mm.
And like even when they sent him down in March of '48 after that one game, they sent him down because they had a home game the next night. They had a game to sell tickets for, and the Rangers never told Larry that he needed to improve on anything in his game. Like there was like, if you want to like, well, no, he didn't need to. I mean, you can always improve, I suppose, but like he showed in every facet of the game, whether it was offense, defense, killing penalties, checking, he could do it all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so to be sent down, and with he just knew after that.
Yeah.
He played out the season, and he knew that they were not going to give him a chance. They weren't serious about it. But like
Sorry to clarify, he
Yeah.
played out the season with the Rovers, right?
With the Rovers,
Yeah.
they were into playoffs, and so after the playoffs were done, the Rangers wanted to re-sign him, but he knew at that point he was not going to get his chance at the NHL.
Yeah.
He hadn't given up on the NHL, but there were 5 other teams. And so he stayed in the Quebec League, signed with another team in the Quebec League. By the way, a league which drew like the Montreal Canadiens drew their players from.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He becomes the MVP of that league, and yet no other team even offers him a tryout. So like it's it just you imagine the frustration, the hurt, the pain of that. But he loved the game. He won a championship for his team in the Quebec League. They won the Canadian Championship. The game gave him so much, but he went over. And the other part of his story that often doesn't get attention is the fact that he then goes over to Europe. He becomes a superstar in England, and then he goes to Switzerland, where he basically, he helps to develop. He popularizes the game. They've never seen a player like him. He becomes the first player of Chinese descent to coach a pro team over there. For 10 years he helps to basically grow the game in Switzerland. Like he was the most, there were things in the papers about him being the most spectacular player one could imagine, and he was putting on these exhibitions of hockey there, not just with an expat team, and they would play the Soviet national team and beat them. So the Czechoslovakian national team and beat them as well. He was even helping those hockey powers to get to higher levels. So
Mm.
so he's, and just like even at the minor league, when you're drawing 15,000 fans at MSG, you are
Mm.
changing the face of the game.
Yeah.
People are seeing you and saying, well, okay, so wait, other people can play too. Like this isn't just doesn't need to be just a white man's sport.
Yeah.
And so just changing attitudes like across North America for decades, and then to Europe, it's his impact on the game really is, but it's just something that hasn't really been talked about until
Yeah.
very recently.
I find as I'm talking to you, and even after I read your book, I got this sense that with that big of an impact, and like you were saying, you did your cross referencing, looking at news articles. I did just a minimal amount of research, just to kind of get a sense for just to verify because the story as you wrote it's pretty grand. And I look online, and lo and behold, it's as grand as you describe it. So the fact that this isn't something that is celebrated and talked about at a much wider scale, at least until now, it tells me something that I think you somewhat alluded to earlier, that there's some intentionality in burying this. It feels like at least previous generations of the powers that be in hockey, quote unquote, were embarrassed by the fact that this guy did not get the notoriety that he deserved.
Absolutely. So hockey, the NHL has been doing diversity initiatives for over 30 years.
Hmm.
They had, when Willie O'Ree came along in 1958, he got a fair chance. He played, he played most of a season, right, at the big leagues. He went to every arena in the show.
Yeah.
He got a fair chance. So he was he wasn't playing that many games. He was a natural face of hockey diversity, like natural, for sure.
Right. Oh, of course.
I think the focus went into growing the game in the black. Like I think Willie Reed deserves every accolade he gets too. The league did go and pluck him out of, I think he was working in a hotel in San Diego and in the 90s, and they basically created a job for him. And he's done amazing work. He's grown the game in, especially in the black communities, and hockey. That was another thing. People didn't realize that the history of hockey in black communities goes back well over 100 years. It goes back to the 1800s, and so that's kind of come out. And so I just love that. But the focus was, they didn't widen the focus to, we've had players of Asian descent before Larry. Maybe they weren't quite as good as him, but just interest in the game, playing the game over 100 years as well, well over 100 years. And yet it feels like our community doesn't just gets sort of forgotten again. And we don't, it's starting to change, because you have teams that are hosting Lunar New Year events and stuff like that to get us back in. But for the longest time, we were just invisible. And so now I think as people learn about the story, people that have power, none of the people that made the decisions back then are alive anymore, right? Like it's not we can, but now as NHL teams learn about this, and I'm gonna address the Rangers. It's sort of like, you're right, it does make them uncomfortable. I've had many discussions with them, and I've tried to be supportive and work with them and to be cooperative and diplomatic and everything. I understand why it's uncomfortable, right? Like I get that, but I think after all this time, the Rangers over the years have done a few things. Very, very little really, but they have, when they brought it up, it's like, it has been the narrative has been more about, well, we were ahead of our time by bringing Larry up, and society wasn't ready for Larry, And it was, we were just kind of, but I mean, at least we gave him a chance. So it was, and it's kind of
Hmm.
not really addressing the truth of the
Right.
matter.
Right.
And I get why you don't want to say, well, we didn't give him a fair chance, really, but I think after all this time, why is it so? Why can't they maybe look at it um, with that perspective,
Right.
like that, for the game to continue to grow and be more inclusive, like when there's an injustice in the past,
Mm-hmm.
isn't like I don't know, don't we have a responsibility, or isn't the right thing to do to just acknowledge that and
Mm-hmm.
say people like Herb Carnegie and Larry
Mm-hmm.
Kwong didn't get the chance because of
Mm-hmm.
racism, of the time, but those were
Right.
decisions that were made by people in the
Yeah.
NHL that excluded them, and now we can maybe understand that when given the way things were back then, but now we know that's not like I would just Larry never heard from the NHL or the Rangers in his lifetime.
Mm.
Get that, from 1948 to the year he passed away in 2018, never heard a word. They didn't create a job for him. He would have been a
Wow.
phenomenal ambassador for the game,
Yeah, absolutely.
not just in the Asian community, but like for everyone. He
Yeah.
had so many friends. No one had, in all my research over, better part of 2 decades, I've never heard one person say a bad thing about him.
Mm.
I've never, in any article, in any correspondence, or he was a special person. And it was just a lost opportunity for the league to really show that it could be more inclusive. And so we continue the work because I think
Yeah.
it needs that. Maybe this is idealistic, unrealistic, but I really think that he's owed an apology by
Mm-hmm.
the league, and that they
Yeah.
recognize that his 1 minute did mean something, at the
Mm-hmm.
same time that it was he deserves so much more.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but you have teams like Seattle, the Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
They just invited Larry's family to Seattle,
Mm.
and for their Lunar New Year game, and had a big. They had a presentation. They gave him the Hero of the Deep award.
Oh, wow.
Donated $30,000 to the Asian community there for
Mm.
initiatives. And so you have franchises like that are seemingly more open to bringing Larry back into the game,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have I guess before we wrap, I do want to make mention of the fact that you're spearheading an effort to get Larry into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Am I correct in pointing that out?
Yeah, we have, and there's a team of us. So Mo from Hockey for Youth
Mm.
is behind this. Christopher Wu, who runs Asian Hockey Card Collection on Instagram, which is a
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal resource for
Yeah. I've
just
actually started a conversation with him, and
yeah,
he when he gets back, he's on a trip right now. But when he gets back, we have a call scheduled. So
fantastic.
yeah, we're gonna be chatting soon. So
It just hits you like how much participation there's been from people of Asian descent in this game, or people from Asia in this game, going back decades and decades. So yeah, that's a great one. So he's involved. Chester Sitt, who's a filmmaker who did a documentary about Larry called The Shift, is helping. Toby Wong, who has been able to get letters of support. We have like 40 letters of support, including even Pat Keller from USA Hockey, the California Amateur Hockey Association, the Swiss Ice Hockey Federation. The Calgary Flames just sent a letter from
wow.
their GM, Craig Conroy. The Asian American Foundation, Make Us Visible, all these advocacy groups too, Gold House, are getting behind this. And we want to induct him as a builder of the game, like Herb Carnegie got in, and also Willie O'Ree.
Yep.
I think that I would love to see for builder. I think we could have a category or in the Hall of Fame, like a trailblazer category or something, just to differentiate it maybe from builder, because builder can be coach, it can be manager, it can be many things. But I think Larry deserves to be in there as a builder in that sense. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got Chris started a petition, and it's got well over 12,000 signatures. It's the most
Awesome.
signed Hockey Hall of Fame petition ever.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
So
cool. So Chad, I mean, you're doing incredible work. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And where can people find you? You've got social media, right? Do you want to share even a website for whatever work you want? And I'll put all of that in the show notes so people
Sure.
can click when they're not driving. Obviously, if you're listening to this in the car,
Yeah.
don't go clicking around for show notes. But when you're at it in a safe place, go into the show notes. But for those who are unable to go into the show notes, where can people find you or your work?
Okay, so for years we've had a Facebook fan club called the Larry Kwong Appreciation Society. So like you'll see there's just tons of stuff in there, and his family's involved with that as well. They're the nicest people. He has one daughter, two granddaughters. We're going to be at the BC Hockey Hall of Fame on July 12th.
Okay.
So Larry's finally being inducted into the BC Hockey Hall of Fame.
Awesome.
In Penticton. So if you can make it, come on up to the Okanagan in Canada. And also on Instagram, there's the Larry Kwong book. Instagram, there's my personal one, which is soon.kwong. And those would probably be the best places, or
Cool.
LinkedIn.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Chad, thanks again for sitting down and talking with us here. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful that we connected, and I hope to continue connecting with you in the future. This is your first time on the podcast, but I hope maybe it's not your last.
I'll come back anytime. Congratulations on this. Like I said, I've been waiting for this for my whole life, and
awesome.
and to really dig into this history that's been just overlooked, right, for so long, and the love of the game that's out there in the community. Like I live in I cheer for the Canucks, the Vancouver Canucks. You just go to a game and look around, and it's you see a lot of Asian faces there, right? And it's we've loved, and it's we care about it, and well done. This is great. I look forward to. Well, I've subscribed, and I just can't wait to hear what you come up with in the discussions that
awesome.
You have, and thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. So that does it for this first episode of the Asians in Hockey podcast. A couple notes before we sign off. First of all, we want to give a shout out to Dan Harbridge, who is Women's Hockey Cards on Instagram. Dan actually did a lot of work as well to help get the movement towards getting Larry Kwong into the Hall of Fame up and running. Additionally, Larry Kwong Day here in New York was actually the work of an organization called Make Us Visible, which is led by Jeffrey Gu and Kate Lee. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and be sure to share this with your friends. We're still in the process of getting the show refined and polished, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the amazing conversations we'll be having on the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, or pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. Also, a theme song is on its way, so of course, you don't want to miss out on that. So be sure to subscribe. Finally, give us a follow on Instagram at Asians in Hockey and on Blue Sky at asiansinhockey.bsky.social. And please feel free to shoot me an email at asiansinhockeypod@gmail.com. See you next time on the Asians in Hockey podcast.